analysis of some daily games that I've been playing in the chess.com Daily Chess Championship. I'll be making 3 short, hopefully, videos counting some of my better games from the tournament. But let's dive into this first one. So I'm playing white. My chess.com username is SodiumAttack03. And we're facing pineapplepro123, who's one of the better players in our division. So I was looking forward to this game. So open with a d4, knight f6, c4, g6, and we have a King's Indian defense. And this one, I was looking forward to playing against a King's Indian because I feel like I get good setups, but I failed to convert in the middle games. So I was looking forward to how this would go, but we just have the classical setup here: e5, castles, knight c6, d5, knight e7. And first crossroads for white. Does white want to go knight e1? Does white want to go knight e2? It's not knight d2. That's knight d2. Or b4, the bayonet attack, which I took a liking to during the tournament, and especially with playing a4, bishop a3. So I took a liking to this variation during the tournament. Knight e8 was played to accelerate the f5, g5 kingside attack. And c5, pushing on with the attack on the queen side, and now f5. Recommendation here of a5, probably at least annoying for black, because trying to slow down white's queenside attack with just one tempo trying to cost white several. But a4, just gunning for it on the queen side. h6 was played. Again, the slowdown tactic a5 probably would have been more accurate, but I don't blame anyone who focuses on their own plans. Bishop a3, this is the variation I took a liking to. The reason behind bishop a3 is when you play b5, you want the c5 to be defended, and bishop a3 does that. Because, for example, after white's next move, f4, if you go b5 without this bishop on a3, then this pawn on c5 is weak. So, backing up to bishop a3, f4 was played, and knight to d2. So, the purposes of this is a couple things. First of all, I want major control over g4, because that's the next pawn to come marching down the board, and if black can achieve g4 with no real counterplay from white, then black should be much better. So knight to d2 lines up the pieces to cover g4, and it also gets out of the way of f3, so allowing f3 to stop the black f-pawn. Also prepares possibly maneuvering this knight to c4 to place additional pressure on d6. This will become an interesting pressure point later in the game. King h7 was played so that this rook can come down the g file when g5, g4, g3 happens. b5 pushing ahead on the queen's side, and g5 going on the king's side, and now we see the benefits to this bishop a3, as now our c5 pawn is solidly defended because we've pushed b5. So a5, it's an aesthetically pleasing move because you just look at these pawns. And black's kingside attack is a bit slower. So rook f6 was played. I like the engine recommendation of knight to g6, preparing h5, h4, h3, and perhaps knight h4. We're going to see similar knight jumps in another game that we're going to look at later today, so be sure to check back for that one. b6, and as I've played the white side of the King's Indian a lot, I've typically blundered into setups, especially in blitz, where black just locks down the queen side completely and can have free reign on the king side. So I was aware of that, and I'm trying to bust open as many lines as I can on the queen side. And now the interesting stuff starts to happen as there is a lot of pawn tension right here on these advanced pawns. And there's a lot of variations to calculate, like can I capture a7 perhaps in the future? Do I capture c7? Do I capture on d6? Do I play knight a4, knight b3, knight c4 to try to up the pressure? And black now has a concrete plan of playing g4 as well after perhaps rook to g6. So a captures b6 was played in the game. A takes b6, trying to preserve as much tension as I possibly can on the queen side. Bishop to d7, preventing a c6 push, which has been annoying in several King's Indian games I've played in similar structures. And now b captures c7, queen captures on c7. And now we reach kind of the critical point in the game where most of the action happens. I played c captures on d6, which doesn't work. Knight to b3 would have been much more solid, and then meeting captures on c5 with the bishop captures on c5, and then trading rooks on the a file. That would have given me a solid space advantage and possibility of rook f to b1 on the queen side, opening up some more lines. So that probably would have been better, but I went for c captures on d6, which I thought worked, but it didn't. The best move for black here is queen captures on c3. And the problem is this bishop is attacked, and if I capture on e7, that pawn is actually stuck. So here, likely bishop to b2 would get played, which is a tricky move because the queen's under attack, and also the rook is under attack on a8. The problem is, obviously not rook a6, the problem is after queen captures b2, rook captures a8, knight captures d6, black has two pieces for the rook, and it's not immediately obvious if white can do much about black's kingside attack, because the queen on b2 here for black is actually really well placed to stop white's queen from having free reign on the queen side. And now black's pawns can perhaps start marching down the board, potential g4 pushes in the future, e4 is potentially weak, so maybe even f3 ideas. So black would be slightly better in this position, but I would have some play too. This b7 pawn is a big target, and I do have some space. I could maybe, if the queen moves, I could play queen to b3 and bring rooks over, bring my kingside rook over into the game. But this would have been better for black. But instead, after c captures on d6, black played knight captures on d6, which is a blunder, missing the idea of winning two pieces for the rook. But it's not immediately obvious why this is a blunder, and luckily we're playing daily or correspondence games as opposed to blitz games, because that allowed me to find the ensuing tactic of bishop captures on d6. And now the queen's under attack and the rook is under attack on a8. So if you meekly capture back the bishop, then I'm going to take on a8, and I've just won too much material. So you have to take on c3. And you are hitting the rook twice, and you are also hitting the bishop. Rook takes a8 is a very sensible idea. Black would play rook captures on d6, and the game would go on here with me being up the exchange. And black's chances of a kingside attack look slightly worse now that the knight for bishop trade has happened, because my bishop on a3 wasn't doing much on the king side, whereas this knight, which landed on d6, was very active and could potentially have leaps to e5 or even rerouting to g5. So this looks much better as I'm up material and the kingside attack does not look as strong. However, we went for another line that simplified the position even more in the position, and that's bishop takes on e7. And now, since the rook is under attack on a8, and now this rook is under attack on f6, you kind of have to take on a1. Rook takes a1, and as the queen is under attack, queen takes a1, and queen captures on d2. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and now the position has simplified a lot more. I am still up the exchange, but in a much more simplified position. And now it is a lot more obvious that black has immediate problems. For instance, this b7 pawn is very weak and is not easily defended while keeping active pieces. This bishop on f6 is kind of trapped in here behind this web of kingside pawns. And there really aren't the knights and the rooks. I mean, there are no knights and rooks now for black to try to orchestrate an attack on the king side with. So by choosing this line where I took on e7, I simplified the position a lot more, and now we actually have this nice passed d pawn, which would end up deciding the game later. Bishop h5 was played because now this bishop exerts some slightly uncomfortable influence over the black king, and ideas like queen a8, just going for a7 and perhaps infiltrating to f7 are not that far-fetched, and this game is looking very powerful for white. Queen to d3 was played just going after, that's not e4, going after the e4 pawn and defending it with rook e1. Probably I could have just played queen a8 and then just gone after these pieces, but rook e1, queen d2, and now I'm trying to come up with some sort of concrete plan to infiltrate on the queen side. So the next couple of moves were me just trying to shuffle around my pieces until I can get a good queen side setup for my queen and rook. So queen to c1, queen b4, queen b1. If I trade off the queens, I'm totally winning with the passed d pawn and up the exchange. So queen a5, and now rook to c1, and now I've settled on my structure. The queen and rook are going to exert pressure on these powerful squares. Now, note that if I had grabbed the b pawn immediately, it would have failed quite miserably to queen takes e1 checkmate, which would have been a very bad way for a good game to end. So rook to c1, and now as there really isn't a move here for black, you could play queen to b5 to save the b pawn. However, after queen captures, bishop captures, rook c7 check, I pick up the b pawn anyway, and your game is completely destroyed. So bishop to d8 was played. I can't blame you for this move because nothing else works, and even though this doesn't, it's not that much of a consolation. Queen captures on b7, queen b5, and now a really pretty tactic to finish off the game. A tactic that I think is pretty underrated and doesn't show up as much. X-ray with rook to b1, and suddenly there's really nothing that black can do here. Black is losing at least a piece, and there's nothing to do about it. We'll check out the game continuation, and then we'll come back here just to show how hopeless the black position is. The game continuation was taking the queen, queen takes b7, rook takes b7, and as there is no way to save the bishop, bishop a5, rook takes d7, king g8, rook e7, clearing the way for the passed d pawn. Bishop to c3 was played to protect the e pawn, but I'm not after the e pawn, it's just d6, and black resigned here. I was pretty happy about this win. He resigned because this d pawn is unstoppable and I'm already up a rook, so the d pawn is going to require black to sacrifice the remaining bishop for it, and this would be a totally winning game for me. So let's go back to this rook to b1 idea, and The key point of the x-ray is if queen takes b1, then queen takes b1. And there's also nothing to do here. I'm up a queen for a bishop. Otherwise, if you move the queen to somewhere like d3, you just drop this bishop on d7 with check, and this bishop is also going to fall with check. So that doesn't work for black either. Queen a4 is an interesting idea here, but it really isn't sufficient because I can have the deflection tactic bishop to d1, and there's no way for the queen to go on defending the bishop on d7. You're going to have to move the queen somewhere, let's say queen a2, but then we can just play queen captures on d7, and there's nothing doing. For example, the line given king g6, but now we have queen f5, king g7, and now since our rook is attacked, we can get it into the game. Rook b7 check, and the mate into eval starts showing because this queen is very far away. I'm up a rook, and black's king is laid bare. So queen a4 might have been a better defensive try, but bishop to d1 really just terminates resistance immediately. And again, if you don't move the queen, if you try something else, like bishop to b6, you lose the queen. Rook takes b5, and that's that. So a really pretty tactic, this rook to b1. The rook tactically defends the queen on b7, and the queen tactically defends the rook on a1. And it's also an interference tactic, so the queen steps away from defending the bishop on d7. So I thought that was a really pretty tactic. So that's the game. Let's fast forward to the end. And black resigned here. So thank you all for watching. I'll be putting out hopefully 2 more videos today on analysis of some more games that I won. So thank you guys for watching.